Yeah, good evening everyone. I will quickly go into the results I'll be talking about. I guess we all read a lot about demonetization. What I will be seeing here is one of the argument given in favor of demonetization was it will boost the use of non-cash payment modes, and many people who are not using these payment modes will kind of adopt these usage. I do not have like household level or very micro level statistics. These are national level estimates available from payment system information given in monthly RBI bulletin. So I'll be having a very broad sort of picture about these payment modes, and I'm trying to think of one possible explanation in terms of what must have happened in consumers' mind and what change we are observing. So I will be excluding NEFT and checks. CTS is the acronym for that from this particular discussion, precisely because the average value using these payment modes is very high. It's like around 80,000 as you see in these graphs. So for most of the consumer transactions, these modes are not going to be used. They are more like transferring money or something like that. So I will focus on basically debit and credit cards, prepaid payment instruments, acronymed as PPI, which includes like mobile wallets like Paytm, and IMPS, which includes the UPI, which has been marketed quite a lot. So these are the average value of transactions for these different payment modes. IMPS has the highest value around 8,000, which means like average IMPS transaction is worth 8,000, followed by credit cards where the average transaction is around 3,000. Debit cards slightly lower, around 1,000, like 1,400 plus. While prepaid payment instrument, mobile wallets, we will say that for simplicity, is at a very smaller average value, around 300 rupees, the last, like bottom, right bottom. So what approach I am taking here? I am basically trying to see if there wouldn't have been demonetization, what would have been the path of evolution about usage of these different non-cash payment modes, and I compare with actual numbers observed during demonetization. I basically use time series forecasting technique using information in a pre-demonetization period and compare it with the actual numbers. I am using three techniques for it. The halt winters, which is like moving averages, ETS, it is a state space based method, and ARIMA forecasting. My objective here is very general, like do I see a very major change, like a structural shift into the usage of any of these payment modes? So I won't go into the nitty-gritties of time series forecasting, just try to paint a broad picture. So this is about debit cards and credit cards. On the graph on the left hand side shows that the debit cards transaction at point of sales have really increased a lot compared to the trend observed, or if you would have observed a continuous trend from a pre-demonetization period. So all the color plots are basically the forecast, and what we see in the dark right up is the actual usage, as the graphs might not be very clearly visible. For credit cards, we see a similar behavior, but the increase is not as prominent as it is observed for debit cards. For IMPS, which includes UPI, actually there isn't much change than the trend that would have been observed in the absence of demonetization. The forecast and actual, like those graphs are quite mingled together. For prepaid payment instruments, there was quite a bit of jump in the period just following the demonetization, but now the graph, the red one in the graph titled PPI, is falling quite sharply. It might be the case that in few months it is just like in what would have been the trend in the absence of demonetization. This is a bit surprising considering mobile wallets have been oft-touted as some sort of like a face of non-cash payment modes, and Paytm has really latched on that particular frenzy. Their ads were quite striking in the like immediate aftermath of demonetization. Why like debit cards or credit cards use have picked up? One of the reason is currency crunch is still prominent. What I am showing in this graph is currency levels. The colored path are basically what would have been the evolution of currency in circulation and currency in public if demonetization wouldn't have happened. While what we see in the dark are actual levels of currency. As you see, the vertical line is the November 2016 where demonetization started. The currency in circulation and with public fell really sharply because people started depositing currency in the banks, and much of the notes were basically no more like legal tender, so they won't be counted as a part of currency stock. And then was the rapid replacement of the currency stock. As you see, the graph started picking up like sharply, but then it was again slowed down after March 2016. And there is still a considerable gap between what would have been the level of currency in the absence of demonetization and what we are actually observing even now, like at the end of 2017. This data is still November 2017. There is another structural change in this currency in circulation. Around 95% of currency in circulation is with public and a small part is with banks. But now we see a slightly kind of decline in the currency in circulation that is with public. It has to do something with the increased uses of debit cards. Like if I am paying by debit cards, the currency doesn't come out of the banking channel. It simply shifts into the accounts of like buyers and sellers. There is one reason like why people might be preferring debit card payments higher, and it's like kind of correlated, is the point of sales basically. The graph on the right shows point of sales where you can buy using debit card, credit cards or other non-cash mechanism. The POS have almost doubled after demonetization. The graph on the right, like from like you can see the very rapid rise. There is no like reason in fact to kind of forecast and see whether there is a change. It's very visible even to the naked eye. This is the level of total debit card and credit cards. They have been rising. In the recent month, total stock of debit cards had gone down due to some of the, like you might have read about the SBI invalidating a large proportion of debit cards, but the level has been rising consistently in the last few years. This is the interesting thing. We have seen what is happening to the non-cash payment modes, but what is happening to the cash? Like how much cash is being withdrawn from the ATM? So the first graph on the left is average transaction done at ATM. As you see, the vertical line is again the November 2016 when demonetization came in force. There was a sharp drop in what you can withdraw from the ATM because there were legal sanctions on what we can withdraw. We couldn't have withdrawn more. But as those constraints disappear, the behavior is coming back to the normal. In fact, it is ahead than what would have been the trend in the period prior to demonetization. You can see the rapid like rise in the graph, like in the post-demonetization period. But total transactions happening at ATM are less. The graph on right. Again, the colored lines, basically it's like what would have been the total transactions if demonetization wouldn't have happened. And the red line, which is like clearly below the trend that is forecasted. So we observed a kind of contradictory trend, like there are less transactions taking place at the ATM, but those who are withdrawing are on average withdrawing a very similar amount than what they have been withdrawing. ATM transactions per debit card, they have been declining. It has nothing to do with actually the user's behavior. Basically, debit cards have been pushed quite aggressively by the government. Like with a Jan Dhan scheme, anyone who was opening a bank account got the debit card. So you see a fall in the average ATM transaction per debit card. Precisely, many of the users do not use debit card. Like they have the bank account, but simply no ATM where they can go. So the average drops, but it has nothing to do with the users. Yeah, this is like the graph on left is how many debit card transactions take place at per ATM per month basically. They are around 3,500 and something. Again, these transactions have declined in the aftermath of demonetization because of the lack of currency. There wasn't much cash to go around. But as the stock of cash is being replenished, the transactions are again like slowly picking up. The total number of ATMs have consolidated in the aftermath of demonetization. So you see the concave sort of graph on the right. It was increasing before demonetization, but now the level has been slightly steady. At the same time, debit cards and credit cards, like these graphs show the average point of sale transactions per debit card or per credit card. We clearly see there is a rise in the average. But for debit card, the average is even less than 1. In a very simple word, what does it mean? Prior to demonetization, almost 70% of the debit cards were, at least 70% of the debit cards were not used to make any digital transaction. The average is around 0.3 at the best, which means 70% of the debit cards never registered any POS transaction. They were either used in the ATMs or they were not used at all. This reflects on the fact that very small proportion of Indian consumers are actually doing non-cash transaction. Still great deal of transactions are happening in cash. We do not have the official number of how many transactions are actually done in the cash, so it's just a wild guess. Credit card transactions like done per credit cards are actually more. This reflects the fact that people will get credit card by their choice, not like it will be forced on them. And there will be certain usage where they will find it's beneficial to have a credit card. So the credit card transactions are clearly better in the average, and they are just following or continuing the trend after a brief surge in the post demonetization. So, available evidence basically tells us two things. There has been a certain increase in adoption of debit card and credit card as a mode of payment. We see their POS usage increasing. The ATM transactions have gone down, but the average transaction that a consumer does at ATM is again of a similar magnitude. The IMPS, or which includes UPI and which has been marketed a lot as some sort of payment mode, doesn't show a change drastically different than what we would have observed in the absence of demonetization. Prepaid payment instrument or mobile wallet for simplicity, because they form a large chunk of PPI, they have shown a huge surge, but again that particular usage is falling back like sharply. So how do we provide some explanation to these observed evidence? Again, this is a broad level sort of evidence I have. So my explanation won't be the right or the explanation. It will be simply one of the explanation. So I suggest that there are actually two groups among consumers: those who are savvy in making digital payments, non-cash payments, and other consumers who use cash for most of their transactions. When demonetization was kind of marketed as nudge or shock towards adoption of non-cash payment modes, the underlying assumption was those who are not using debit cards or mobile wallets will suddenly learn to use them, because now there is a huge scarcity of cash and they are now forced to do something in the absence of cash. They might have done for a while, but as cash is becoming available, this latter group, which is like a cash friendly group, is coming back to its usual behavior. Now, since like they can wait in the queue or they can run through the multiple ATMs to find whatever cash they will go and withdraw a similar amount of cash as they were withdrawing earlier. But the other group, which is like more tech savvy group, they do not either, they have a higher cost of time, or they have understood what they were doing with the cash they can easily do with their debit card. So they have shifted towards the use of debit card. So we simultaneously see two contradictory evidence. One is a rise in the debit card usage in the point of sale. There are more point of sales available, but the mobile wallet, which have been seen like as a layman's alternative in a non-cash payment, is not really showing a sustained like boost in the usage. One of the things that must be said that there is a slight difficulty on a seller's side to use mobile wallets. Like they are structurally deficient in a sense. There is a limitation on how much value one can use the mobile wallet for, and converting them into bank account basically asks the seller about certain 1% or something. So think about this. You might have heard those tales during demonetization that some vegetable seller has started accepting Paytm during the December 2016 or something. When he wants to convert that 10,000 rupees or so into his bank account, bank will be asking 100 rupee. That's the transaction charge Paytm will take out from it. In his small profit margin, he might find that cost too high. Like suppose he is earning only 500 or 800 rupee profit. There is no point paying 100 rupee out of it just to get some business. He can replace the Paytm wallet with a simple diary where he notes down who buys vegetable from him and asks them to settle later on in the 2000 rupee note. I guess you might have observed it in the grocery stores or other places where rather than shifting to digital payments, they use trust to kind of maintain their clientele and get paid later. That's one reason that set of customers who were cash friendly have not really shifted to the non-cash payment modes, but a small group, which is a savvy group, has started using debit cards or other modes where they were using cash. So cash transactions are low, but average ATM transaction from the cash is still very similar as what it would have been the pre-demonetization. This is clearly a very broad brush picture, and there is a kind of need to do a further research, like more nuanced understanding, rural-urban differences, or how different regions have different sort of adoption of non-cash payment modes. More important is a household level study, that for any household, how many transactions they do in a typical month's time or so, and what is the distribution of different payment mode in their transactions. Such studies are ubiquitous in developed countries, but not much done in the Indian context. So, to reiterate my point, there is a kind of contradictory evidence we will see, which is there is a clear boost to the debit card usage, but average ATM transaction hasn't fallen that much. As cash will come back, maybe people, those who are cash friendly, will start using cash with the equal rigor, and a very small group has shifted to the non-cash payment modes. So that's like the result from this broad brush picture. Thank you.